science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. So put on your safety glasses, do up your lab coat, hold on to your tail. It's time for the Science Pawdcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Pawdcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. Big news with our family this week. Chris and Adam have been working behind the scenes, keeping Adam's cat, Ginger, who's been living with my father-in-law, Gord. He's on the same property as us. This special diet that cuts down the amount of proteins that is in their saliva, fur, and urine that causes people like me to be really allergic. And they have this wash that they've been putting on the cat a couple times a week. And Ginger is now at our house and has been for 3 or 4 days. And I have had no allergic reactions aside from when Ginger's claws got me when she was scared about the dogs. So we may have a new science animal that is going to be joining the crew. I'm really happy for Adam. He loves that cat. And Chris loves cat. And a part of my heart also loves cats. I just haven't been able to be around them because I'm so allergic. So this plan that they had on based on some of the science that we talked about on the Science Pawdcast is working. Speaking about what's on the Science Pawdcast, this week in science news, we're going to talk about a study that looked at who's better at following directions and finding out where they're lost. Country folk or city folk? I love this story. In Pet Science, we're going to look at an older study, it's a couple years old, that broke down, do dogs really smile? Are they smiling? How could we know if they're smiling? And they used other techniques to determine if dogs' facial features match their emotions. Our expert guest this week is a dog behavior geek, Laura VanArendonk Baugh, who's going to talk to us about training dogs, but also some of the cool stuff that she does with creative writing. Hey dogs, did you know one of the benefits of libraries? Well, they're really good for circulation. You know, I was going to do a creative writing joke. I have to be true to my shelf. Okay, let's move on with the Science Pawdcast. There's no time like science time. This week in science news, we're going to look at a fun study that pitted the ability to follow map directions and not get lost. It pitted two groups of people, city folk versus country folk. Now, one of the things that if you talk to our kids, they will tell you is that Chris and I rarely fight, but like hardly ever do we fight. But when we're traveling, we sometimes do bicker at each other. And when I'm driving and Chris is the map person, she'll admit if you push her to it that she really can't read a map. It's like it's a different language. And Chris is literally the smartest person that I know, but reading map directions and knowing which way to turn is just not how her brain works, even though she's a genius at math, way better at math than I am. So I saw this study and I was like, I'm going to have to break it down because I grew up my entire life in rural Alberta. Like I'm talking the little tiny village I lived in had about 300 people. That's it. Chris lived her whole life in cities. So I was like, let's take a look at this. This study was described in the journal Nature and looked at the ability of people to handle very complex environmental cues and base it on where they grew up as a child. Now, how did they go about doing this? Well, how do you test somebody's skills at navigation or not getting lost? They used a video game. Again, that's something I love video games. I don't have a lot of time for them anymore, but I do love video games. And they played this game called Sea Hero Quest. The sample size was enormous. 400,000 people from 38 countries played this game, and the game was designed by neuroscientists as a way to basically sneak data about how people's brains work. The long and short of this is, because this study's basically looking at your ability to navigate, we don't have to go too much into how. It's a game, it's 3D, it's virtual reality type game. On average, the people who said that they grew up outside of cities, where they probably had experience with random paths in forests and had to rely on very subtle clues. There's no buildings, there's no street names, none of that. They were way better at navigating in this game than people who said they grew up in only cities. Now, the advantage grew even wider between city and rural people if the city the person said they lived most of their childhood in was a very simple, laid out city. And simple, I'm talking like genius. There's some cities I've been to that like the roads go all over the place. And I've been to some cities that are basically like a square and it's like a grid. So it's perfectly easy to navigate. Whereas like, I'm thinking of the capital of Alberta, it's Edmonton. And Edmonton is like a nightmare in the center to navigate because it's separated by this big river. And you go down the river and the streets are going up like these like just wild hills. I'd imagine it's kind of like San Francisco because I've been there before. There's parts of Edmonton that resemble San Francisco. At any rate, so the difference was the worst. People did worse if their city was was really well laid out by those city engineers, or they were able to plunk down a city on very flat land and built it like a grid. Now, the conclusion of the study isn't cut and dry. They can't say only rural people, only people who grew up in the boonies, the boondocks can navigate. No, it's plausible that people who grew up in rural communities perhaps have a better sense of navigation. But that's not something the study can conclude. The data set seems to show that people who do grow up in these more complex and less grid-like environments do better in a video game, but there's so many other variables too. Because so much data was taken from this sample size, there's some other things that also play into better navigation. Gender, education, and a superior sense of smell. I guess that helps. Maybe you can sniff the air like a dog and find your way back home. What's the point of this study? What's the point of this game? Well, this is just one interesting factor from taking all of this data about how people's minds solve problems. This group of scientists that built this game are hoping to use the data to also look at things like Alzheimer's disease as people progress through the disorder, or maybe finding clues that can let them know that that disorder, that disease is happening. So are you a rural person? Are you a city slicker? Is there any city slickers out there that are taking a little bit of umbrage with this study? You're like, I grew up in a city and I know my way around. Well, take it up with the scientist, not me. That's science news for this week. This week in pet science, let's try to answer the question, do dogs smile? I know when Beaker and Bunsen are so happy, it looks like they're smiling. How can it not be a smile? When they're running, they've got their mouth open. When it's time to go for a walk, they're looking with their giant grins. But are we personifying our facial features on something that's not human? Are they really smiling? Let's take a look at some of the other research that took a look at dog features and the emotions the dogs are feeling. Okay, so we kind of have talked about this before on the Science Pawdcast. Like, we looked at a study from Current Biology, and it took a look at wolves and dogs being given some kind of like treat in a container that was impossible to open. The dogs and the wolves acted differently. The wolves, when they couldn't figure it out, kind of got angry or kind of frustrated and kind of stomped off, whereas the dogs sought out a human. They went and actually looked for a human and gave the human a little look, whereas the wolves didn't see the humans as any kind of like help to their predicament. Another study we looked at also was the release of hormones when dogs and humans lock eyes. So we looked at that when you look at a dog and the dog looks at you, we both experience an increase in oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone. Gaze is something that there's a ton of information and research about, that dogs do use the ability, that just locking eyes with humans to get things. Now, that's eye contact. Where things get a little bit more murky is when we look at facial expressions, right? So That's like a smile in a dog, and that's like puppy dog eyes in a dog. So one of the studies that looked at puppy dog eyes turned out to be kind of a bust. Julianne Kaminsky studies dog cognition, and they did a study where they went to a dog shelter where they looked at something called FACS, that's facial action coding, and it measured the facial motions of dogs when they interacted with people. So they took a look at all of the different facial features that dogs did, and they used the responding variable was how quickly it took the dogs to get adopted. And they found that some of the dogs used puppy dog eyes, so like inquisitive raising of the eyebrows, the sad looking up at the human, the puppy dog eyes. And the hypothesis was dogs that used that would be able to get adopted faster. And they found that that behavior had no impact on the dogs getting adopted. So there wasn't a selective advantage for the humans with puppy dog eyes, and the dogs didn't use the puppy dog eyes. So it could be just something that in the past humans selected for because it was cute, but the dogs don't know that it works. They also had other variables, like was there food involved? Puppy dog eyes didn't occur for food. And that's confusing to me because I know Bunsen and Beaker put on the charm when I'm eating something on the couch. They come over and boy, do they put on the puppy dog eyes with me. So that brings us to the smile. And the dog smile, there isn't a lot of data on when a dog is smiling, what is its brain doing? When a dog is smiling, is it happy? Is it sad? Is it stressed? There just isn't a lot of information on that. It's really tough to take something that we know is a smile in humans and then it means something for us and subscribe that to another animal that is not human and doesn't have a human-like brain. There are so many similarities between us and dogs, but there are so many differences too. Remember, we've talked so much on the Science Podcast that dogs see the world through a sense of smell. So alien to us. I would love for future research to come out that a dog smile conclusively proves that the dog is happy when they're smiling. But as of right now, the objective research that's come out is we don't know. A relaxed open mouth correlates to when a dog is in a positive setting. But does a relaxed open mouth mean a smile? I'm going to say that it does. And I can make that conclusion because I have confirmation bias. And I have wishful thinking. And I have optimism. And I just love dogs. That's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, before we get to the interview section, I thought I would just give you some ideas about how you could support the Science Podcast. Number one, you could support us on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/BunsonBurner. There's multiple tiers of support, and the lowest tier of support is not much more than a cup of coffee a month. The second way is you could check out our merch shop. We've worked really hard to partner with clothing companies that do a great job of providing vibrant colors and soft feels. We also have the Beaker Stuffy for sale. It's so cute. The third way you could support us is giving us great reviews on our podcast playing apps. Any kind of review helps. And if you can't find a review, share our podcast with people. Thanks, everybody. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have behavior geek Laura VanArendonk Baugh with me today. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm so happy to be here.
Yay! Laura, where are you calling into the podcast from? Where are you in the world? You don't have to tell me like the exact address, but our guests like to know where people are. Where are you in the world?
I'm calling from the beautifully scenic Indiana, and there was just a small amount of sarcasm in that. But actually, where I live is quite nice. I have a small farm in Indiana.
Oh, sweet. That's similar to where we live in Alberta. We have a farm property too.
Yeah.
Nice. And Laura, one of the questions that we ask our guests right off the bat is like for the podcast, why would you classify yourself as a behavior geek?
I'm professionally a geek, I guess I can say. So I spend my days teaching people about animal behavior.
Okay.
And I work with clients. So I just came back from working with a client in their home and their new puppy. But then I also teach certification courses. I'm going to say for the Karen Pryor Academy for Animal Training Behavior. I don't know if I'm allowed to reference a company. We can cut that in post. But that is for professional trainers who are working toward an additional professional certification. and I speak at conferences and I go around to teach workshops. And yeah, I just generally nerd about animal behavior.
So would you say that's your main career? Or I know you're an author as well.
Yeah.
Are you kind of like a dual classed, like D&D?
I'm dual wielding. Yes.
Dual wielding class. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, both of those careers, at this point in my life, I'm spending approximately equal time on each of them. So I truly am dual classed at this point.
Oh, very cool. So let's get right to it. Can you talk to us about Canines in Action?
Canines in Action is my personal business here in Indiana. And it is where I get the awesome job of working with people and their pets individually, which is super amounts of fun because I get to do, I'm not super niche. So I'm working with service dogs and I'm working with a family with a new puppy that I just mentioned. And just, it's a lot of fun getting to get people on the right foot or figuring out how to enjoy their pets more or something.
And how long have you been doing this for?
A while. I probably about 20 years or so with CI. I'd have to sit down and do some math to do that. So and I've always worked with animals in some aspect. And, I was that kid with the ponies in horse shows, and I did dog 4-H when I was 8 or 10 or something. And so I was always that kid, and then I just grew up and did it professionally.
You said to yourself, "Hey, I love animals so much. Let's do this and make some money at it."
Well, and it's I'm definitely rolling around in the cash like
no, I'm just
that's it. but no, it's so amazing to I think I can say this because by the time this episode airs, nobody will know what client I saw today. But I just came from a house today where people were in tears with relief that they were going to be able to keep and enjoy their dog. And I'm sorry, that doesn't get old. That's going to be great.
No, I can't imagine. That's so rewarding.
It's really fun. And then also like, I do get paid to play with puppies. Like, it's not the worst job on the planet.
So, Laura, one of the questions that our listeners are going to think about, and it's because we've talked about dog training lots on the podcast with other folks in this section. And one of the things they ask about is like licensing and training. Did you have to jump through some of those hoops to get to where you are? I hope that's not too sensitive of a question.
No, this is a great question, and it's actually probably even more timely than you realized because there's some major licensing and I'm going to say proto legislation and things going on right now. And I know that we have a international body of listeners, so this may vary depending on where you're sitting. But yeah, here where I am in the United States. Literally anybody can just say they're a trainer and open a business, and there's not currently any licensing. And in fact, I have known in my career people who didn't like dogs who would be a dog trainer because and so those people maybe don't have a lot of scientific background and such. So depending on where you are in the world, you may or may not have access to a licensed trainer, but there are lots of certifications that are useful. And I mentioned KPA earlier, for which I am faculty, so for full disclosure. But that, those trainers who are working with me, many of them come in already as professional trainers, and they take an additional 6-month course, and then they have 3 examinations at the end, and they have to pass all 3 of those examinations with a 90% or better in order to get the certification. So you're getting somebody who's had a little bit more grounding and a little bit more formal education and such. And this is traditionally a trade where, a trade where people would learn by apprenticeship.
Right.
But more and more in the last decade or two, we've seen some formal education coming in to really no, show us you understand the science of this. And I think that's a good thing.
I would say probably the vast majority of trainers that learned by apprenticeship or trade were good. But then without that regulatory body, there's always the chance for I think even with a regulatory body, but probably more so without one, it's more of a free-for-all that could lead to some icky stuff.
Yeah, and we don't want icky stuff.
No, not when we're working with the best creatures on the planet, that's for sure.
Yes.
So with canines in action, one of the things I have a couple questions about, I mean, using your expertise, why not? There's lots of people who listen to the podcast and they have dogs and they're getting puppies. What are some things you can tell us about things new puppy owners should be thinking about or doing?
All right. How long do I get for this? How long is this episode? Because it's about to be 2 weeks long. So I would say, honestly, my number one thing for puppies is socialization. And I'm going to run on and not let you get a word in edgewise for just a moment. Socialization is, it's a word that is so frequently misunderstood because it sounds like just go out and be social, which is not a bad idea. Like definitely do that too. Play with your puppies. But from a scientific perspective, that's a word that is talking about how the brain learns about what is normal and how to respond to things that are normal or uncommon. And it's something that, because of the way most of our North American societies are built today, we have made a lot more difficult for many dogs. And so that's where we see a lot more things like anxiety and fear aggression and problems that, honestly, you can pay me to deal with them, but I'd really rather head them off and prevent them. And so I actually have an entire book about socialization. So there's my little shill for that and why I will try to truncate this this conversation. But I can teach, sit, down, roll over, all those things at any time. I have a very narrow window for socialization because that's a biological process. It's physically in the brain. And so that's going to be my primary focus with any puppy. Because if I'm a little bit slow on teaching, some nose targeting, great. I'll get that at 20 weeks old and it won't make any difference one way or another. But socialization, I have got to get done by 12 or 16 weeks. And so let's take time to make that happen.
Do you think during COVID, that's something that the puppies have been at a huge disadvantage with?
Oh my gosh, it's been massive. And I actually, I'm going to tell what I hope is a funny story on myself. So in March of 2020, I was at a conference. We were for a behavior and training conference, and I was scheduled to speak there, but the governor shut down our conference the night before it began, because March 2020, right? All the shutdowns are just beginning. And so we had one meeting where and of all the faculty and the audience and who hadn't departed yet. And I was explaining, that I'd already been thinking about what this was going to do to puppies. And of course, at that time, even if we're just thinking it's a month or two, right? It was still predicting, we're going to see all kinds of socialization issues in our puppies. And I said, people think socialization is just exposure to things, but that's not how socialization actually works. And people die of exposure, which I was trying to make an Oregon Trail joke, but that is not, in fact, the joke to make while the governor's shutting down for a pandemic. And so it was awkward. So anyway, yes. So we have just been seeing in the training community so many, we just call them COVID puppies that are under-socialized for these reasons.
And you know what? Beaker was a COVID puppy, and definitely, luckily, we got her to interact with some dogs, but not when everything was like completely shut down. There's like 2 or 3 months when she was young where she didn't have much interaction with other dogs, and it affected her quite a bit. And maybe still to this day, I don't know. She's come a long ways with that with other dogs, whereas she would be fearful and didn't want to really be around them, and that's weird for a golden retriever.
Right.
And we worked hard to get her out of her shell that way, but that's a struggle, I guess, for a lot of people. And it's good that we're talking about it. So for people that have a puppy, that's so important.
Right. And if I can just throw in the one thing, again, people think that socialization is just like, I just have a checklist that my dog has to see these 6 things and then we're social, or, whatever it is. And I want to emphasize it's much more of a coping mechanisms and attitudes process. So if my dog sees a lot of variety, then variety is what's normal, rather than if I see just a few things, then normal is just a very narrow catalog. And so even if I don't have access to seeing, 200 people or whatever, because of situations, I can still work to teach my dog that variety is normal. And then when we do meet new people or new situations or new objects, that, oh, we've already learned that variety is normal. That's fine. And so we probably have more flexibility even in limited situations than we generally realize, because we don't always think of socialization as a process rather than as a checklist.
That's really profound. I never thought of it that way.
Well, that's why I wrote a book. So
awesome. We'll have links to those books too in our show notes. The other question that we could maybe chat about, picking your brain as somebody that's worked with dogs quite a bit. A lot of folks have a fearful or a reactive dog, something that they're scared of other dogs, or they're really reactive to other dogs or other people. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, something that could probably take 2 weeks, but could you help us with a couple tips or tricks?
Yeah. And this is something where I do kind of specialize a bit. And I don't think it's fair to say, or it's not a good thing to say I love working with reactivity and fear aggression, but I like seeing progress towards solving these things. What the two things that are probably the biggest aid that we need to think about as we're working on this is, in order to feel safe, in order to feel that, because reactivity and fear aggression are both rooted in anxiety and fear, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to feel a sense of predictability. We need to know what's happening and what's about to happen. And we need to have agency. We need to have a sense of control. We are not afraid of things that we are in control of, right? So giving our dogs exercises that give them both predictability and a sense of control will go a huge way toward getting some traction to working toward reactivity. So a real quick example I'm just going to mention because it's easy, is nose targeting, which is a silly, simple parlor trick of a behavior that then I can use in 500 places. So I definitely love teaching it for my dogs. And nose targeting is just, I have a hand target. Usually I use 2 fingers. It doesn't matter. Like, there's no one right way to do that. And then the dog's going to touch it with their nose. So simplest trick on the planet, looks like it has no utility in the real world. But the dog's just, oh, I boop your fingers and food comes out. It's great. It's a Pez dispenser. But then when I go into a tough situation, I can ask for that nose target. Suddenly, it's not just, why is everybody staring at me, right? Now it's, oh, there's a hand. I know I can touch this to make food fall out. So I know what the situation is, and I'm in control of the situation because I can choose to touch that or not. And if I choose to touch it, I can make you feed me. And it's not that food is the only, reinforcement option we have. It's just a really convenient one. And so that almost always is where I'm going to start for a lot of dogs. And it's so, so easy that anybody can do it. And there's all kinds of ways to make it accessible. We can use a target stick for short dogs and, people who can't bend over, and all kinds of things that we can make this happen. But it all comes down to predictability and control. And that's how I'm going to approach nearly all of my fear aggression cases, is what can we do to make this, easier for our dogs to predict what's happening and to make choices about what's happening.
So without getting into the specifics, because you have vast amounts of training, and I don't want to, oversimplify it, but you would use that in the situation where the dog might be acting fearful, or in the situation where the dog might be acting aggressive, to give them agency over the situation. Is that where we're going with this?
No, that's a good way to say it. And then also gives me a really good barometer. If I have a dog who's feeling a little nervous and I say, hey, can you touch my hand? And the dog goes, yeah, I can. Okay, great. We're at a point where we're still having rational thoughts happening. And if I have a dog who's completely flipped over the edge, they're in a pure, I'm going to say panic attack, because I don't think that's a wrong way to describe this in some cases. And, that dog's not capable of touching my hand for a cookie, right? That dog's also not capable of learning in that moment. There's no thought process happening. We need to get out of dodge, reset, and I can't fix something in that moment because the dog's having a panic attack. So yeah, it's an easy way to do some early testing. If I have a dog who's just like, yeah, I can touch your hand, no big deal, or I can touch your hand, but I have to think about it. Those are huge pieces of information for me.
I've heard it explained that way, and it just makes me think about, like, because I'm a teacher, if a kid is having like a meltdown and they're crying or they're super upset, and I'm like, hey, come on over here, I'm going to teach you some advanced chemistry.
Right.
Pretty sure they're not going to learn anything that I say to them.
Right. And yeah, and that's exactly what the parallel, and yet so often we're told, well, just explain it more loudly. And, oh, that helped. Thanks. Okay. Oh, avogadro's number. I got it now. We're good. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I hope that memory was right. Tell me that was right.
No, it's good.
Oh. It's been a while since I did AP Chem.
And with reactive dogs and aggressive dogs, I guess, do you use the word aggressive? I've heard that's now falling out of favor. More reactive instead of aggressive is the better term.
I don't think, I think the problem is that the words get used inaccurately. So people are trying not to use them inaccurately, and there may be some overcorrection on that.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to say fear aggression is still aggression. Absolutely. But we also need to acknowledge that, it's not that the dog was born bad and woke up this morning trying to figure out how to flip you the paw, right? Like that's not how that's what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I see people using the terms, both of those words, and honestly, what I'm going to do when we sit down is I'm going to say, okay, I don't care what you call it. Let's see exactly what's going on, because, labels are only so useful and not always accurate. And what the actual behavior is going to be much more important.
Right. You need the observations first.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. There's the science.
Yes, absolutely.
Gotcha. Do you have a success story that you could share about working with dogs like that you'd be able to share with us?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit vague because
sure, yeah, you don't want to
ask the client, right?
Yeah, that's why I was.
Yeah,
but I just thought this is a good point, a feel good point.
Right.
Go ahead.
I have one I think it's probably a pretty good success story, because it did happen during the pandemic. And so we were doing virtual training. So I'm actually, online from Indiana, and this person's online in another state. And we are coaching through, we had a dog who was a resource guarder who had bitten every member of the multi-generational household. And so they were really concerned about, can we even keep our dog, because you multiple bites in this family. And we worked out a protocol and using other behaviors and teaching the dog to actually bring items, instead of guarding them, and everything was positive reinforcement based. We introduced some different management skills for different members of the family. And so we got to the point where the dog would pick up random household objects that he previously would have guarded, and would just walk in and find, the mom in the kitchen and be like, "Hey, here's the TV remote. Here's a shoe. Here's a paper plate somebody left on the kitchen table, or somebody left on the coffee table with some food on it. Can I trade this to you for cheese?" The answer is yes. So yeah, it just completely inverted from "I will bite you" to "protect this" to, "Hey, is this a fun game we can play together?" Aww. And that was awesome. And yeah, it took a while. That was not an overnight success. We spent, a few months on that. But I loved at the end, the woman, the owner said, I think it's time to break up. And I'm like, no, you're graduating. Like, this is great. But yeah, I was so happy with their progress. And I think what I liked, the reason I shared that one is I was never in the same state with that person and their dog. We were just able to talk through and apply the science from a distance. So.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that. What a feel good story too. And to go from something that's terrifying to somewhat goofy, which is really, really heartwarming. Can we chat about some of the books you've written, and books plural, not singular? I was just snooping through your website, and I was really impressed. Actually, I thought it was really cool. You've written books from, different genres, different things. Would you like to talk about a few of them for our listeners?
Yeah, so I have the nonfiction books, which are about training. So that's books on dogs who get frantic and fear aggressive, and books on socialization for puppies. And I have then the fiction side, where I write epic fantasy and other things. And then I have a book that sits right in the middle that is my kids' book about how to train fantastic beast using positive reinforcement. So it's teaching your unicorn target training and stuff. So, and that actually, I have a fun story about that. I had one of my service dog clients has some other animals as well, some farm animals. And they had a emergency situation come up with one of their farm animals, and they hadn't done a lot of previous training with. And she's like, "Wait! I have the kids' book. How did they do this with the Leviathan?" And she used the technique from the kids' book with the farm animals, and she told me that it was great and it worked. So, yeah. But anyway, yeah, that's so I write a lot of things. I guess I'm bad at branding. So I'm in nonfiction and in epic fantasy and all the things.
I know it's not really something that we talk about lots on the podcast, but could you tell us about your epic fantasy books?
Yeah, I'm actually just about to launch the fourth and final in the series. The series is called The Shard of Elan. The first one is Shard and Shield, and then the fourth one, Kin and Kind, is coming out probably by the time this episode airs.
Oh, cool!
So found in all the finest retailers. Yeah, that is. I've got a. How do I want to say this? There's a soldier who lives in a world where his job is fighting against interdimensional magical raiders. Basically, like lightning Viking raids. They hit and run because they can just hop across dimensions.
Okay.
And his only friend gets trapped on the wrong side of the rift, and the only way he can save her life is to betray the people he's sworn to protect from these raiders. So that's where we get started.
I love it. That's cool. I've noticed in the last 10 years that fantasy, I still am. I was a massive fantasy fan back when I was young, like reading books like the Forgotten Realms and the what were they called? The Dragons of Autumn Twilight books. I forget what those were called. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Anyways, so those ones, and it was really, really like on the outskirts of what was cool.
Right.
Right. But like the last 10 years, it's just exploded.
It's been amazing. Like the spectac world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the same thing. Like I hung out in the fantasy nerd crew, but it was definitely the nerd crew. Right. and then now, like an Avengers, movie will come out, and its gross revenue will be the same as a GDP of another country, right? Like it's just insane, the social shift, and that's fine. We're good.
Oh yeah, bring it on.
Right. No, more material to play with. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, like with Game of Thrones, and now on Amazon they've got the Wheel of Time series, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big deal. So, well, I'm excited for your book and your book series. I apologize, I haven't read them, but I'm interested now. So,
what? I expected you to get all 4 of them done in the week that we had the play before this. Yeah, they're only like 500,000 words. What else were you doing?
Are your books self-published with a publisher? Can we find them on Amazon or through your website? What's how?
They are available everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm what's called a hybrid author, which means some of my stuff comes out in traditional publishing and some of it I self-publish. Right. So that particular series is self-published, but you should be able to go into any bookstore, and if they don't have it, they can order it for you. So nice. Okay. Not terribly limited.
Sweet. We'll have some links for everybody who's listening to find at least your website and the names of the books for sure.
And I can probably throw in a discount code on, like, if anybody wants the kid training book for holiday gifting or something, I can make this happen. So
okay. Well, this was fun. It's not normally that I get to talk about fantasy with a guest. Sometimes we talk about the MCU because it's big and people are big into that, but this is another level, which is cool.
Well, and I have a lot of fun when I do go to a writers conference or something, and people are talking about, and this is then the dragon will do this, and I'll be like, no, that makes no ethological sense. Why would the dragon do that? Biologically speaking, this would have to happen, and behaviorally, these things, and everybody just stares at me like, why are you breaking the fun? But I'm like, how much more immersive it is when stuff makes sense.
Oh yeah,
you tell. What is it? You tell 9 truths to tell one lie, right? Or something. And so if you can make all of the your mythical creatures and things more behaviorally plausible, you're actually going to get deeper into that story, because subconsciously your brain's going to recognize, no, this is real. So yeah,
I think that's why there's such a big buy-in with The Expanse on Amazon, because a lot of the science in that is rooted in reality, with the exception of some of the more fantastical stuff. So I hear you there. So since as a dog trainer and involved in fantasy, What did you think of How to Train Your Dragon? Because that would be right up your alley of both.
Yeah. So my favorite comment on when the movie came out, How to Train Your Dragon, and my friend took her, my friend who was training with me at the time, took her daughter to see the movie, and her daughter, I think, was 4 or 5 at the time. And they came out of the theater, and she's like, "That was a really good movie, Mom, but they didn't do any training." And I loved it because it's not right.
No.
Like, she's used to seeing me with a clicker and a pouch full of cookies and whatever. And actually, if I can soapbox for just a moment, that movie is a really good example of how Hollywood handles animal behavior, which is, it's just very mystical. It's very, either you're nice or you're mean, and then the animals automatically sense your character and respond, and then everything's a golden retriever suddenly, and that. and okay, like, I liked the movie. I'm not going to throw shade at the movie, but I also kind of wish that we had a little bit more nuanced presentation, because it's really not fair to people who grow up, expecting everything to be a golden retriever. Jurassic Park. I love Jurassic Park. I'm not giving it back. Okay. Like, I love Jurassic Park, but just because something's an herbivore does not mean it's super friendly and safe to hang out and pet. Right. Like, can I introduce you to hippopotamus? Okay. Like, and that's just a thing that gets perpetuated in pop culture. And I actually have a presentation, I do at writers' conferences called "Your Velociraptors Are Broken" on how we get things so wrong, and then why it's actually more immersive and more dramatic if you get it right. So, do I have time to give an example?
Yeah, I would. I'm just listening in rapt attention. Like, I could listen to you all day about this. This is fascinating.
So the thing that happens in every single movie, and I know why this happens in every movie, but it happens in every single movie, that the giant creature leaps out of the underbrush and snarls and growls, and then begins to pursue the hapless human who is supposed to be lunch, and all of these things. And or they're running away, but they can hear it growling behind them, or the wolves are howling as they chase the people. All of this stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. All the things. And in real life, if you were hunting something, why would you advertise your presence? Why would you, tell them, "Hey, I'm chasing you, and I'm exactly this far behind you, and I'm also going to waste my valuable oxygen, not in running, but in making noise." Okay, so all of those are defensive sounds. Like, I'm going to growl at you to make you go away, not to, and the thing I tell when I'm talking to writers about this, because I'll happily consult with anybody if you want your animals to be more realistic. I'm like, okay, when you sit down to eat a burger, do you yell angrily at it? No, neither does your T-Rex growl at its people, roar at its people while it's chasing them. So there we go. There's my little my soapbox for today. But
it is.
But it looks so much cooler when they're roaring and making noise, and that's why it happens in movies, because we need sound effects and all of that. But it really just doesn't make any sense.
Wow. Yeah. I've read harrowing accounts of people who have been attacked by animals, and one of the things they say is just how quiet it is. Like,
right.
It's just it's a silent. I mean, aside from the horrific nature of the attack, but it's very quiet.
Yeah, and you will get vocalization, especially in, like, dogs. Dogs are not, by any stretch of the imagination, wild animals. We have done so much to dogs to bring them into our homes. So you will see a little bit different behavior in dogs, but it's not that different. So if your dog is chasing a squirrel, it's probably chasing that squirrel silently. If the squirrel goes under the shed, the dog may bark there, but now that's a frustration bark. That's not a hunting bark, right? That's well, I can't actually use the language that the dog is probably using on the podcast, but there's a lot of bark is a 4-letter word happening there, the squirrel. But yeah, during that chase, there's no way they're going to waste oxygen and barking. No. And you'll get a few variations on that in the dogs that we have really changed their genetics a lot. But anything that actually does need to hunt for a living, they're not going to do that.
I'll tell you, when Beaker nearly murdered Buster, our rooster, it was a very, very silent thing that happened, aside from the flapping of the rooster. Right. And Bunsen silently watched in horror as the whole thing was happening too. So
Yeah, at least Bunsen watched. He didn't join in.
Oh no, he
there
was
we
just
go.
like, he couldn't believe what was happening. He just sat there and he's like, I can't believe you're doing this, you stupid
Right.
little wolf.
He's like, this is not what I signed up for this morning, but okay. Yeah. It's not what Buster signed up for either.
No, Buster wanted to definitely lodge a complaint with Human Resources after that.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing about your books. This has led to a really cool conversation, so I appreciate it.
I love when people let me go off on one of my pet peeves, so thank you.
So we have a couple standard questions on the podcast, and one of them is right up your alley because we get to talk to guests about pets. You work with people's pets, but do you have a pet story from your own life you could share?
So I'm going to talk about Shakespeare, who was actually my very first Doberman. And just very briefly, I was his fourth home in less than a year. He was 11 months old when I got him because he was untrainable. And Shakespeare had, I think, 26 titles and certifications before he died. So he's not that untrainable. Anyway, one of the things that Shakespeare did with me for about 4 years, we would go out in the summers and work with a day camp for at-risk and developmentally disabled youth. So we would have kids who are, having legal troubles, or kids who were developmentally delayed or whatever. And, we would have different sessions with these kids. And so Shakespeare's a Doberman. So lots of people are a little bit worried about him anyway, because he looks kind of scary. And I have to say, like, Shakespeare actually could step up when needed. Not to go into a ton of details, but he did run off a couple of guys who were very creepy one night. So he was just an awesome dog, but he also, was really well trained and did this stuff with me. And we got a kid who came in who was just overwhelmed with being this close to a dog, and got down, got out of his chair, got down, and was actually crawling on top of Shakespeare and screaming and flailing his arms, and just, not in any way mean, aggressive, just, overwhelmed, didn't know what to do with so many feels.
Oh.
And, Shakespeare, I looked down, and first of all, like, screaming and flailing, and a lot of dogs are not going to be super comfortable with that anyway.
No.
Yeah. And I looked down, and this kid has actually pinned Shakespeare's ear between his knee and the floor. Like, the dog's head is on the ground, and he's got his knee resting on the ear. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is completely unfair to my dog. And also, potentially dangerous, depending on how bad that is actually hurting. And I'm trying to intervene, but, we have all kinds of restrictions. I'm not allowed to touch kids and all kinds of things. And I'm just like, trying to get the teachers to assist me, whatever. And Shakespeare, and I don't know how to say this in a way that doesn't sound crazy, but I swear to you, it's true. And he just rolls his eyes up at me because his head's actually pinned to the floor. He rolls his eyes at me, and he's just like, "It's cool, Mom. I get it. It's cool." Aww. And he just, sat there and took it, was not in distress, was not upset. I knew he was uncomfortable, but, and again, this is a dog who was quite capable of making his feelings known when the need was. And he just knew that this was not intended as a threat. And, the kid really couldn't help, emoting in this way. And it was just so cool to me that we had that silent communication. He was just a really cool dog. He was really good at communicating. He actually would tell me jokes. It was funny, but so, we're going to sneak up behind the cat, catch my eye. Mom, are you watching? Watch this. Woof. The cat would you'd have to like make eye contact to make sure I saw him do it. Right. Anyway. So yeah, that was just a really cool moment of, absolutely communicating and understanding beyond what I would ever have asked of him personally.
I wonder sometimes when dogs are in that situation, like, because they perceive the world so vastly different than us, that they can maybe smell that it's not a threat, like, I wonder that sometimes with some dogs.
Yeah. And I'm absolutely certain that in certain cases, the dogs are, picking up on increased levels of testosterone or, any number of things that can be going on. And I think Honestly, I think in this case, this was a dog who had seen, we were talking about socialization earlier. This was a dog who had seen so many thousands of people in a public context that he knew what normal behavior looked like. He knew that this didn't look like what he had been trained to classify as normal, but he also knew what threat looked like. And this wasn't that either. And so I think he was, he just had the experience, and I'm going to include all the senses in that, being one of them. He had the experience to make an informed decision, and he made it. Yeah.
I love it. What a cool story. But Bunsen doesn't have the same amount of experience with people, but I think sometimes I see how he treated little Beaker, who was just a terror to him every single day as a puppy. And he knew that, he'd been around dogs, he'd been around puppies, and he's like, this is not a threat to me. Like whatever. He was so gentle and patient with that little, with that little bananas puppy. So it's not the same
Puppies
as yours.
Are little terrors. Yeah.
Yeah.
We love them. It's a good thing they're cute, but they're little terrors.
Yeah. And some dogs don't do well with puppies, right?
Right.
I don't in any way want to take away from your story, because that's such a sweet and amazing story. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Cool. And I apologize if you already said, like, where did the name Shakespeare come from?
I didn't say, and I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I went through a period where a lot of my dogs were named after, famous writers. I had, not just dogs. I had a cat named the Venerable Bede, which is really getting into them there. I had a Chaucer, who was a really cool dog. And, I had a Dante. So yeah, but I mean, he just fit into that. And I couldn't tell you, like, I didn't sit down and do it. I did. He was out with me in public once, and somebody's like, "Oh, who's your dog?" And I said, "This is Shakespeare." And this guy just starts going off, "You're a fraud! You didn't write any of that. It was Bacon." And he's just screaming at my dog, and I'm like, "Okay, I get your joke, but I'm not sure the dog does. So simmer down." Yeah.
You're lucky the dog doesn't see you as a threat. You're just being,
right.
Just being
that was another one where Shakespeare did kind of look at me like, "Mom, dude, what's up with this?" like I'm not going to bark at him, but what's wrong with this guy?
Yeah, he's being a little bit sketchy.
There was some side eye. Yeah, there's definitely some side eye.
The other standard question we ask our guests is for a super fact, and it's something that that when you tell people, it blows their mind a bit. It could be a story or
something
that Do you have a super fact you could share with us?
I have a behavior super fact.
Yay!
And it's probably like it's low key, and it's going to sneak in, and then like delayed mind blow. I hope. Let's see. So antecedents, what happens before the behavior, we would say verbal cues, like maybe the word sit, do not cause behavior to happen. Consequences of previous behavior cause behavior to happen. And that's like, well, yeah, of course, obviously that makes sense. And then you start thinking about it, and that's not at all how we live. So I like to, as the clever human, I say, oh, if I say sit, the dog will sit. So the word makes the behavior happen. The word doesn't do anything. There is nothing about the sound waves traveling through the air that strike the nerves in the dog's spine. All of that. It doesn't happen. Only the fact that sitting has previously resulted in, tasty treats or whatever, in the presence of the word sit, that works. So I don't know if I said that very clearly, but antecedents nothing we say makes behavior happen. Nothing we do makes behavior happen. Consequences make behavior happen. So we need to think about reinforcement histories.
The more positive the consequence, the faster the learning occurs, at least according to the new research. That's what
oh, absolutely.
That's been the last 2 or 3 years of debunking all of the punishment training.
Further back than that. Yeah. There's a ton of data. Yeah. But the punishment is highly reinforcing to the trainer in the moment. So it's a lot of times it's hard for people to sort through the data for the emotion. It does feel successful. Like it absolutely feels successful. I get it. That I did, I'm a crossover trainer. So I did other training before I got into positive reinforcement training. So I get it. I totally can speak that language, but I'll tell you, I'm here for the efficiency. I'm a data girl. So yeah.
Efficiency is king or queen.
Yes.
There you go. That is a super fact. And that is something that is super important for people to remember. So
Yeah.
Good,
Because
good.
otherwise it just becomes say it louder, and that's not probably going to work. Yeah.
No, not until they figure out some way to turn the barks and the human conversation into something dogs can understand. That's we don't speak that language together.
Hey, even when we speak the language, the number of times that you would say to another human, "Did you not hear me explain?" Right? Well, yeah, but that didn't actually connect to previous consequences, so never mind.
That's right. Every time I do something, a chore around the house, I got a cookie, I would get overweight very quickly, but I probably would do more of those chores too.
Right. And we'd have a lot less per my last email if we understood how this worked. So
True. The last section of the podcast is a fun one. We get to learn a little bit more about our guest outside of what they do for their career. It could be hobbies or causes. And I don't believe we've ever gone down this route before on the podcast. You wanted to talk about chocolate.
yes, I do have a chocolate passion. Yeah.
Go for it. I have no idea where you're going to take us, but I'm happy to go on the journey.
Yeah, so I have to say, actually, it does have to relate to my professional career, because I think maybe 60 to 70% of my professional output is powered directly by dark chocolate, especially, this week as I'm working on the book launch, right? Like it's going to happen. But the cause side of this, a lot of people don't realize here in the US and Canada how much of our chocolate has I'm just going to say highly unethical background. And I don't mean that just in, they're not using best farming practices. I mean, like, child slavery is a real thing that is going into this. So the quick and dirty way of buying, of finding, better stuff to purchase and to support with your consumer dollars, according to what I have been able to read, is that if I buy organic chocolate or if I buy fair trade chocolate, but it's hard to find stuff that's marked fair trade. That's a relatively niche market. But if you're buying organic chocolate, the paper trail that's required for organic chocolate also makes it much more clear for people to see if it's coming through, with child labor and other highly unethical things. And I don't mean child labor like the kids working on the farm. I mean literal slavery. So yeah, as much as possible, I try to buy organic and fair trade chocolate and share that around so people can help make better choices for the world at large.
So this may be one instance where the organic nature, the organic tag is important with the product itself.
Right. Just because what happens, with the by the time the cocoa beans get sold through multiple middle markets, and you'll hear the chocolate industry, like most of the major North American manufacturers will have something buried in the bottom of their website saying, "Oh no, we ask questions," but by the time it gets through multiple middle purchases, all that history is gone. For the organic certification, that paper trail has to be there, so it actually will show the origins of those beans.
That's something to think about for the folks out there that like chocolate, I guess, eh? And I mean that's something you're passionate about. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Do you have? Okay, I have a couple chocolate follow-up questions. Do you have time?
Yes.
As somebody who likes chocolate,
there's always time to talk about chocolate. I mean, always.
Please don't hate me, but what is the deal with spicy chocolate? It is disgusting.
Okay, I'm actually not going to disagree with you there.
Okay,
so.
Is that who came up with putting chili peppers in chocolate?
That's actually the original chocolate.
I know. I did some research but yeah.
So here's the thing: they weren't putting milk and sugar into their chocolate, so it was a completely different product. And I actually had the opportunity when I was in Costa Rica to get like fresh cacao off the tree and then eat the fruit rather than the roasted beans that have been turned into what we call cocoa and chocolate. Oh my gosh, we are missing out so much by not eating that fruit. It's an amazing fruit.
Oh, really?
So yeah, it's so good. And then I had some again later that was not fresh. And I was like, oh, that's why North Americans don't eat it. Like it really needs to be fresh. But yeah, so the fruit and then the beans, but originally through Central America, they were not putting milk and sugar into the chocolate. Milk chocolate was a much, much later development. And but yeah, I'm totally with you because I am I'm basically kind of a coward when it comes to spice and chilies anyway. So But yeah, I'm like, no, do not adulterate my chocolate with chilies. We have milk and sugar now. We're good.
So the second question is that as somebody who really likes chocolate, what is your favorite type of chocolate? Like you mentioned dark chocolate, but is there something that you just like? Is there a flavor of dark chocolate or a type of dark chocolate? I'm just curious because I know nothing about chocolate.
I like dark chocolate because typically it's harder to hide bad chocolate in a dark chocolate. So the cheap chocolates, and we're not going to throw out brand names, but they're the ones that say chocolatey flavored treat instead of chocolate, right? Yeah. And they're putting so much other gunk in there that it's not worth it. And dark chocolate, it's harder to cheat in. So that's one reason that I like chocolate. You can certainly get cheaper dark chocolate, but it's just they have to work a little bit harder at it. But honestly, I like chocolate in nearly any form except for spicy chocolate and except for white chocolate, which is totally fake and it doesn't even get to be in the club. I'm sorry.
Oh, my wife is going to be so happy because I occasionally have white chocolate and she just thinks you should use that as like chalk on the sidewalk. Like you should not be putting that in your body.
Yeah, it's no. The good news to circle that back around. If your dog gets dark chocolate, that's something we need to be concerned about. If your dog gets white chocolate, it's so fake, it's not even a health threat. It's fine. So yeah, there you go.
Well, we're at the end of the interview, Laura. Thank you so much for first off agreeing to chat with us on the Science Podcast, and it's been such a great conversation because you have worked with dogs most of your life and our show is all about animals. So from me to you, thank you for agreeing to chat with us.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And I have to tell you, like I mentioned to my husband last night, I was like, yeah, I have an interview on the Bunsen and Beaker podcast. He's like, you heard me with Bunsen and Beaker? Like, I was like, oh, I've made the big time now. So that's great.
Cool. And the other thing is plug where people can follow you. Like, do you have a Twitter account? Are you on social media? Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, the easy place is to start at my website, and then you can follow all the spokes out into the social media hubs wherever you want to go. So Laura VAB, it's Victor Alpha Bravo. Nobody wants to type Laura VanArendonk Baugh. LauraVAB.com is where you can find most of my fiction and casual, hanging out stuff. And then caninesinaction.com is where you can find my training and behavior work.
I love it. Okay, so those will be hyperlinks in the show notes, everybody. So you're just one clickety-click away from getting to both of those. Don't do it while you're driving. If you're driving, listening to the podcast, please pull over before you look for Laura's books.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, this has been such a pleasure, Laura. Thank you so much for chatting with us today and best wishes in the future, and especially with your book launch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, sorry everybody, Adam is so busy this week. He's got a bunch of projects on the go, and he's a busy guy, so we couldn't actually make time to do the Adam family section this week. It will be back next week, don't worry. So we'll just wrap up the podcast. Thanks so much for listening to us week after week, listening to our show, and special thanks to our expert guest, Laura VanArendonk Baugh. Great conversation about writing and behavior in dogs. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon. It's growing. I think people really like the private Twitter account. But Chris, let's give a shout out to our top tier patrons.
Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Kimberly Bond, Nate Stephenson, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Rater, Shelby Leggett, Mary Goose, Katya Lynch, Marianne McNally, Andrea Persons, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Jaguar, Leela Perriello, Lynn Armstrong, Lisa Sports, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Lila Ashir, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.